Chapter 1. A Storm in Russia. The year is 1917. Russia is a country in crisis. The winter is bitterly cold. Snow covers the streets, but people gather anyway. Their stomachs are empty. Their patience is gone. They shout. They march. They demand bread and freedom. In palaces and mansions, the rich live well. They eat fine food and wear warm clothes. But outside, life is hard. Factories are dangerous. Wages are low. Farmers, too, are angry. Their land is small. Their families are hungry. For years they have waited for change. Now they are tired of waiting. At the center of it all is the Tsar, Nicholas II. He calls himself the ruler of all Russia. But people no longer believe in him. They call him weak. They blame him for the wars, the hunger, and the suffering. Soldiers, once loyal to him, now join the protests. The Tsar's power is slipping away. In Petrograd, the capital, the streets are alive with noise. Workers leave their factories. Women gather with their children. They carry signs, "Down with the Tsar. We want bread." Their voices rise together. The sound echoes through the frozen city. Suddenly, soldiers appear. Their uniforms are dark against the snow. For a moment, the crowd hesitates. Will they fire? Will there be blood? The soldiers raise their guns. But then something unexpected happens. They lower them. They join the crowd. Cheers break out. The Tsar's army is no longer his. In the shadows, a man watches all of this. His name is Vladimir Lenin. He is thin, with sharp eyes and a bald head. Lenin has been waiting for this moment. For years, he lived in exile, far from Russia. He wrote, planned, and dreamed of revolution. Now, he has returned. He believes the time has come. Lenin leads a group called the Bolsheviks. They want a new kind of government, one where workers and peasants have the power. No kings, no rich landowners, just equality. At least that's the promise. But getting there will not be easy. Meanwhile, in the Tsar's palace, fear grows. Nicholas sits in a golden room. Outside, he hears the sound of marching feet. His advisors tell him to act. "Send the army," they say. "Stop the protests." But the Tsar hesitates. He doesn't understand what is happening. He writes letters to his wife, Alexandra. "The people are just upset," he says. "It will pass." But it does not pass. Each day the protests grow. Each day his power fades. Back on the streets, emotions run high. People are angry, but they are also hopeful. They talk about a new future. What if we could rule ourselves? They ask. What if there were no Tsar, no rich men to take what we earn? But some are afraid. What if the army comes back? They whisper. What if there is no food tomorrow? No one knows what will happen. The tension grows, like a storm waiting to break. The storm finally arrives in March. Crowds surround the palace. They demand that Nicholas leave. Inside, the Tsar is quiet. He knows he has lost. He signs a paper. It says he is no longer the ruler of Russia. The Romanov dynasty, which ruled for 300 years, is over. Nicholas and his family leave the palace forever. The people celebrate. For the first time, they feel free. But freedom does not bring peace. The Tsar is gone, but chaos remains. Who will lead the country now? Different groups fight for control. Some want democracy. Others, like Lenin, want revolution. The future is uncertain. Lenin and the Bolsheviks begin their work. They speak to workers in factories and soldiers in barracks. You deserve better, they say. Join us. Their words are simple, but powerful. Crowds listen. Some cheer. Others wonder if this new leader can be trusted. One night, Lenin stands before a group of workers. His voice is strong, even though his face looks tired. The Tsar is gone, he says, but our fight is not over. Together, we can build a new Russia, a fair Russia. The workers nod. They know life is hard now. They hope Lenin's promises are real. Not everyone agrees with Lenin. Other leaders call him dangerous. They say his ideas will bring more pain, not less. He wants to destroy everything, they warn. Lenin does not care. He pushes forward. He believes in his plan. The revolution must go on, he tells his followers. There is no turning back. In the countryside, peasants hear of the changes in the city. Some are excited. Maybe we'll get more land, they say. Others are cautious. We've heard promises before, they mutter. For now, they keep working. The fields must still be plowed. The animals must still be fed. As summer comes, the streets of Petrograd remain tense. New leaders rise and fall. The old ways are gone, but the new ways are not clear. Hunger and fear continue. People look to Lenin. Will he be the one to lead them? Will his revolution succeed? Lenin watches, plans, and waits. The storm is not over. In fact, it is just beginning. Chapter 2. The Red Dawn. The year is 1917. In the cold streets of Petrograd, the people are restless. The Tsar is gone. Russia is no longer a monarchy, but peace has not come. The question remains, who will lead this broken country? The answer arrives in October. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, take action. They storm the Winter Palace. The government collapses overnight. A red flag waves above the city. The revolution has begun. Lenin steps forward. He promises a better future. We will give land to the peasants, he says. We will give power to the workers. His words are simple, but powerful. People listen. They cheer. They believe change is here. Factories and farms are taken from the rich. The land is divided. Workers are told they are now in charge. It feels like a new beginning. But not everyone is happy. Some whisper in secret. They say, the Bolsheviks are too extreme. Others shout openly, this is not the Russia we want. Soon, the whispers turn into action. A group called the Whites rises to fight the Bolsheviks. The Whites include Tsar supporters, nobles, and anyone against Lenin. They want to stop the revolution and bring back the old ways. The Bolsheviks, called the Reds, prepare to defend their new government. Russia is now at war with itself. The Civil War is brutal. Cities are destroyed. Villages burn. Families are torn apart. The Reds and Whites fight across the vast Russian land. Soldiers march in the freezing snow. Others hide in forests, waiting for the next battle. In one small village, a boy named Misha watches as soldiers arrive. They are tired and dirty. Their coats are torn. "Who are they?" Misha asks his mother. She looks worried. "They are Red soldiers," she whispers. "But don't speak too loudly. The Whites may come next." The village becomes a battlefield. Misha hides under his bed as gunfire echoes outside. When the fighting ends, the soldiers are gone, but the damage remains. The boy looks at his home. It is no longer safe. His family must leave, like so many others. While the war rages, Lenin works to hold the country together. He speaks to the people. "We must fight for our revolution," he says. "We cannot fail." His words inspire some, but others grow tired. Food is scarce. Supplies run out. Even Red soldiers sometimes desert their posts. Lenin knows the war must end. But the Whites are strong. They have help from other countries like Britain, France, and the United States. These nations fear the Bolsheviks. They do not want a communist government to succeed. They send weapons and money to the Whites. The Reds, however, have something powerful: the will of the people. Workers, farmers, and soldiers rally to their cause. They sing songs of hope and courage. They fight, not for kings or generals, but for a dream of a better Russia. One day, Lenin calls his top commander, Leon Trotsky. Trotsky is a brilliant man with a sharp mind. He understands war and strategy. Lenin trusts him completely. "Trotsky," Lenin says, "the Whites are gaining ground. We must act now." Trotsky nods. "I will form a new army," he replies. An army that fights not with fear, but with purpose. He creates the Red Army, a disciplined and determined force. Under his leadership, the Reds begin to win. But the victories come at a cost. Cities like Petrograd and Moscow face hunger and cold. Factories stop working. Railways are destroyed. Ordinary people suffer the most. A mother in Petrograd waits in line for bread. Her hands shake from the cold. Her child cries from hunger. She whispers, "Will this war ever end?" The answer comes slowly. By 1920, the Whites are losing. Their forces grow weaker. Their leaders argue among themselves. The Red Army pushes forward, reclaiming towns and cities. Finally, the Civil War ends. The Reds are victorious. The country is exhausted. The fighting has stopped, but the scars remain. Millions have died. Villages are gone. The land is broken. People look to Lenin for hope. "What now?" they ask. "What will our future be?" Lenin does not smile. He knows the challenges ahead, but he stands tall and speaks. "We have fought a great battle," he says. "Now we will build a new world, a world where workers and peasants rule, a world of equality and progress." His words bring some comfort, but doubts remain. Can the Soviet Union, the new name for the country, survive? Can Lenin keep his promises? Life begins to change under Bolshevik rule. New policies are introduced. Education is made free for all. Women are given more rights. Electricity reaches villages for the first time. There is hope in these changes, but there is also fear. The government controls every part of life. People who disagree with Lenin's ideas disappear. The dream of freedom feels complicated. One night, Misha, the boy from the village, listens to his grandfather. The old man sighs. "We have seen so much," he says. "A czar, a revolution, a war. But is this what we dreamed of?" Misha does not answer. He looks at the stars above. He wonders what kind of life he will have in this new Russia. By 1922, the Soviet Union is officially formed. It is a new country with new leaders. Lenin stands at the top, but he is not well. His health is failing. Others in the Bolshevik Party begin to take more power. Among them is a man named Joseph Stalin. He is quiet, but ambitious. Some say he is dangerous. For now, Lenin is still in control. He believes in the Soviet Union's future. "We have begun something great," he writes, "but the work is far from finished." As the red dawn rises, the people of Russia wait. They have survived war, hunger, and revolution. Now, they face a new challenge: rebuilding their country. The Soviet Union is born in struggle. Its future is uncertain, but for now, the dream lives on. Chapter 3. A New Nation. The year is 1922. The war is over. The Reds have won. But Russia is broken. Villages are in ruins. Factories stand silent. People are hungry and cold. Millions have died in the Civil War. The land is quiet now, but it feels more like a graveyard than a victory. Amid the ruins, something new begins. The Soviet Union is born. It is a union of many countries, all under one government. Lenin stands at the center. He promises to rebuild. He promises a fair and equal society. For the people, it is a new hope. But the challenges are great. Lenin speaks to the workers and peasants. His voice is calm but firm. "Comrades," he says, "our struggle is not over. The war was hard, but building a new nation will be harder. Together, we can do it." The people listen. They nod. They want to believe him. But food is scarce. Crops have failed. Many still go to bed hungry. The government takes grain from farmers to feed the cities. Some farmers resist. They hide their grain. Soldiers come to take it by force. It is a bitter time. In the cities, life is not much better. Workers return to factories, but there is little to make. Machines are old and broken. Electricity is rare. Families crowd into small apartments. Children play in streets filled with mud and garbage. Yet, people keep going. They have no choice. One day, a woman named Anna stands in line for bread. Her coat is thin. The cold wind cuts through her. She looks at her son, who is shivering by her side. "How much longer must we wait?" he asks. Anna doesn't know. She pulls him closer and whispers, "Just a little longer." Meanwhile, Lenin works tirelessly. He writes speeches. He plans for the future. He dreams of a better life for his people. but the stress is too much. One day, in his office, he feels a sharp pain. His vision blurs. He falls to the ground. Lenin has had a stroke. The news spreads quickly. People are shocked. Some cry. "What will we do without him?" they ask. Lenin recovers slowly, but he is not the same. His speech is weak. His body is frail. He cannot lead as he once did. While Lenin rests, others in the government begin to rise. Among them is Joseph Stalin. He is quiet, but watchful. Some say he is kind. Others say he is ruthless. Stalin works behind the scenes, making allies and gaining power. Few notice him at first. Another leader, Leon Trotsky, is different. He is loud and confident. Trotsky is a hero of the Civil War. People admire him. They think he might lead after Lenin. But Trotsky and Stalin do not get along. They argue about the future of the Soviet Union. Their conflict grows. Lenin sees the struggle for power. He is worried. From his sickbed, he writes letters. In them, he warns about Stalin. "He is dangerous," Lenin writes. "He should not have too much power." But Lenin's warnings come too late. Stalin's influence is already strong. In 1924, Lenin's health takes a turn for the worse. Doctors try to help, but there is nothing they can do. On January 21st, Lenin dies. The news shocks the nation. People gather in the streets. They cry. They lay flowers. Some feel lost. Others feel afraid. "Who will lead us now?" they ask. Lenin's funeral is massive. Thousands come to say goodbye. His body is placed in a special tomb in Red Square. It is cold and silent. People whisper as they pass. "He gave us hope," one man says. "What will happen without him?" Behind the scenes, the fight for power begins. Trotsky believes he will lead. He is smart and popular. But Stalin is clever. He works in secret, building support. He tells people what they want to hear. Slowly, he takes control. Trotsky begins to lose allies. He speaks out against Stalin, but it only makes him weaker. Stalin, meanwhile, grows stronger. By 1927, Trotsky is forced to leave the Soviet Union. He is no longer a threat. Stalin is now the leader. Life in the Soviet Union starts to change. Stalin has big plans. He wants the country to be strong. He orders new factories to be built. He pushes for rapid progress. But his methods are harsh. Farmers are forced to give up their land. Many resist. They are arrested or sent away. Some never return. People begin to live in fear. Neighbors no longer trust each other. A single word against the government can lead to prison. Stalin's rule is not like Lenin's. It is darker, colder, more dangerous. Anna, the woman in the bread line, notices the changes. One day, her neighbor disappears. "What happened to him?" she asks. "He spoke against Stalin," someone whispers. Anna lowers her voice after that. She tells her son, "Be careful. Watch what you say." Despite the fear, some still believe in the dream of the Soviet Union. Schools are built. Women work alongside men. Electricity lights up new villages. For some, life gets better. For others, it gets worse. The promise of equality feels far away. Years later, people still remember Lenin. They speak of his vision for a fair society. He wanted a better world, they say. But the road is hard. His name becomes a symbol of hope, even as the nation struggles. Statues of Lenin stand in every town. His face is on coins and posters. He is gone, but his ideas live on. Chapter 4. Stalin's Shadow. The year is 1924. Lenin is gone. The Soviet Union is in mourning. People wonder, who will lead us now? The answer comes slowly, but surely. Joseph Stalin rises to power. At first, he seems quiet, patient. But behind the scenes, he is planning. His ambition is clear, to control everything. Stalin is different from Lenin. He does not speak of fairness or freedom. He speaks of strength. He tells the people, we must make the Soviet Union great. We must catch up with the rest of the world. His voice is firm. His eyes are cold. Many believe him. They are tired of poverty and hunger. They want a better life. Stalin's plan is called industrialization. He orders new factories to be built. Steel, coal, and machines are needed. Workers are pushed to their limits. Some are excited. This is progress, they say. Others are exhausted. They work long hours for little pay. Safety is ignored. Accidents are common. But Stalin does not stop. Sacrifices must be made, he says. Life on the farms changes too. Stalin introduces collectivization. This means taking land from farmers and creating large, government-run farms. It will feed the nation, Stalin promises. But many farmers do not agree. They want to keep their land. They resist. They hide their grain and refuse to work. Stalin does not accept disobedience. Soldiers are sent to the villages. They take the grain by force. Some farmers are arrested. Others are sent far away to cold, distant labor camps. These camps are known as the Gulag. People call it a prison in the snow. Many never return. In one small village, a farmer named Ivan watches as soldiers arrive. They search his barn. They take his crops. This is for the Soviet Union, they say. Ivan's family cries. They have nothing left. Winter comes, and with it, hunger. Ivan wonders, what kind of future is this? Stalin's rule spreads fear. He does not trust anyone. He believes enemies are everywhere. People whisper in secret. They know that speaking against Stalin is dangerous. One wrong word can mean arrest. Some disappear in the night. Their families never see them again. The government encourages people to spy on each other. Neighbors report neighbors. Friends report friends. Even children are taught to watch their parents. A boy named Yuri hears his teacher say, "If you hear anything against Stalin, you must tell us." Yuri feels confused. He loves his father, but one day he hears him complain. The next morning, Yuri tells his teacher. That night, his father disappears. Yuri's heart breaks. He does not understand what he has done. He cries in his mother's arms. "Where is Papa?" he asks. She does not answer. Despite the fear, Stalin's Soviet Union is changing. Cities grow, new factories rise, Roads and railways stretch across the land. People move from villages to towns. They dream of a better life. In some ways, life improves. Education becomes free. More schools are built. Electricity reaches new places. But these changes come at a cost. One worker in a factory named Maria dreams of becoming a teacher. She is proud to work for her country, but her hands are sore and her back aches. The machines are loud and the air is full of smoke. She writes to her sister, "I want to believe in this new world. But sometimes it is so hard." In 1934, things take a darker turn. Stalin begins a campaign called the Great Purge. He wants to remove anyone who might challenge him. Soldiers, government officials, teachers, even artists. No one is safe. Trials are held. People confess to crimes they did not commit. Some are sent to the gulag. Others are executed. The fear grows. People learn to stay silent. A man named Victor works in a factory. He hears his friend whisper, "I don't trust Stalin." Victor freezes. He does not reply. Later, Victor reports his friend. "I had no choice," he tells himself. "If I didn't, they would arrest me too." Stalin's power seems unshakable. His image is everywhere. His face is on posters, coins, and statues. Children in schools sing songs about him. They call him Father of the Nation. But not everyone believes in him. Some begin to see the truth. They see the fear and suffering around them. They wonder how long it will last. As the 1930s continue, the Soviet Union grows stronger, but the people grow weaker. Hunger is everywhere. The farms do not produce enough food. In Ukraine, a great famine, known as the Holodomor, kills millions. Families eat whatever they can find: grass, bark, even stray animals. Mothers cry as their children grow thinner. The dream of a fair society feels far away. In Moscow, Stalin sits in his grand office. Maps and plans cover his desk. He smiles to himself. He believes he is building a new future, a future where the Soviet Union is the strongest country in the world. But outside his walls, the people suffer. They whisper his name with fear, not love. One night, Maria, the factory worker, writes in her journal, "I want to believe in this new world," she writes, "but I miss the old days too. We had less, but we were free." She quickly hides the journal under her mattress. She knows what could happen if someone finds it. By the end of the 1930s, Stalin's power is absolute. No one dares to challenge him. The Soviet Union has changed. It is no longer a dream of equality. It is a land ruled by fear. Factories work, farms produce, but the cost is human lives. Millions are gone, lost to famine, labor camps, and executions. Yet Stalin sees himself as a hero. He looks out of his window and sees the city lights. He believes he has saved the Soviet Union, but the shadow he casts is long and dark. Chapter 5. War and Survival. The year is 1941. The Soviet Union is quiet but uneasy. The people hear rumors of war. Stalin tells them not to worry. "Germany will not attack us," he says. "We have a deal with Hitler." But Stalin is wrong. On June 22, 1941, German planes fill the sky. Bombs fall on cities. Soldiers cross the border. Operation Barbarossa has begun. Germany has invaded the Soviet Union. The Great Patriotic War, as the people call it, is here. The attack is fast and brutal. Villages are destroyed. Factories burn. Soldiers are caught unprepared. Families flee, leaving everything behind. One woman, Elena, holds her baby as she runs. "Keep going," she tells herself. "We must survive." In the cities, fear spreads. In Moscow, the sound of sirens fills the air. People dig trenches and build defenses. Men and women prepare for battle. Even children help, carrying water and supplies. They know the war will come to them soon. At first, it seems the Soviet Union will fall. The German army is powerful. They have tanks and planes. The Soviet soldiers fight bravely, but they are poorly equipped. They retreat again and again. By September, the Germans reach the city of Leningrad. Leningrad becomes a symbol of survival. The Germans surround the city. No one can leave. No food can come in. Winter arrives. The cold is deadly. People eat whatever they can: rats, leaves, even the glue from their walls. But they do not surrender. They sing songs. They share what little they have. "We will not give up," they say. In the countryside, the people fight back in their own way. They burn their crops and destroy their homes. "If we cannot have it," they say, "the Germans cannot have it either." This is called the scorched earth policy. It is painful, but it slows the German advance. One farmer, Pavel, sets fire to his wheat field. His hands shake as the flames rise. His wife cries. "What will we eat?" she asks. Pavel looks at her and says, "We will find a way, but we cannot let the enemy win." Stalin watches from Moscow. He knows the war is dangerous. If the Soviet Union falls, all his work will be lost. He speaks to the people. His voice is strong. "Comrades," he says, "we must fight for our land, for our families, for our future. There is no retreat." The people listen. They fight harder. Factories move east, far from the German army. Workers, many of them women, produce weapons day and night. Soldiers dig trenches and prepare for the worst. Then, in December 1941, the tide begins to turn. Winter arrives, and the German army is not prepared for the cold. Their machines freeze. Their soldiers suffer. Meanwhile, Soviet troops fight back with renewed strength. At the Battle of Moscow, the Germans are stopped. It is the first major victory for the Soviet Union. The people celebrate, but they know the war is not over. Stalin orders new offensives. The Soviet army pushes west, regaining lost ground. The fighting is fierce. Cities are bombed. Fields are turned into battlefields. Millions die. But the Soviet Union does not give up. One of the bloodiest battles takes place in Stalingrad. The city is named after Stalin, and he will not let it fall. German bombs reduce the city to rubble. But the Soviet soldiers fight street by street, building by building. They hide in the ruins, waiting for the enemy. The Germans are trapped. In February 1943, they surrender. It is a turning point in the war. Back in the villages, life is hard. Elena, the woman with the baby, now lives in a small hut. Her husband is at war. She works in the fields, growing food for the soldiers. At night, she sings to her child. Her voice is soft, but strong. "We will see better days," she whispers. "We must believe." As the Soviet army moves west, they see the horrors of war. Villages are empty. Cities are destroyed. They also discover Nazi concentration camps. The soldiers are shocked. They see prisoners, starved, beaten, barely alive. They vow to keep fighting. "This cannot happen again," they say. By 1944, the Soviet Union begins to push into Germany. The Red Army is unstoppable. In May 1945, they reach Berlin. The city is in ruins. The German army surrenders. The war in Europe is over. The Soviet Union has won. The victory comes at a great cost. More than 20 million Soviet people have died. Families are torn apart. Homes are gone. The land is scarred. The people celebrate, but they also mourn. The pain is deep. The wounds will take years to heal. Stalin is called a hero. His image is everywhere. People praise him for leading the Soviet Union to victory, but some whisper that he made mistakes. He was unprepared, they say. Many lives were lost because of him. These whispers are quiet. Fear of Stalin still remains. After the war, the Soviet Union begins to rebuild. Cities rise from the rubble. Farms produce food again. The people work hard, as they always have. They remember the war with pride and sorrow. They survived. They fought for their land and their families. They won, but they paid a heavy price. Before we begin Chapter 6, a quick note for our listeners. You're currently listening to this audiobook on Woo English. Remember, this content is specially made for Woo English listeners only. If you're hearing it on any other channel, it may be a violation of Woo English's rights. Please ensure you're tuned in to the right source to fully enjoy and respect this audiobook journey. Now, let's continue the story. Chapter 6. Behind the Iron Curtain. The year is 1945. The war is over. Cities are rebuilding. Families are finding their way back to normal life. But peace does not last long. A new conflict begins, a war of ideas and power. This is the Cold War. The world is divided. On one side is the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin. On the other is the United States, led by President Harry Truman. These two countries were allies during World War II, but now they are enemies. Each wants to shape the future of the world. Stalin dreams of spreading communism. He believes workers should control everything: factories, land, and money. Truman believes in democracy and capitalism. He thinks people should have freedom to choose their leaders and own property. The two leaders cannot agree. They see each other as a threat. In Europe, a line is drawn. Winston Churchill, the British leader, calls it the Iron Curtain. On one side are countries like the United States, Britain, and France. On the other are countries controlled by the Soviet Union. These are places like Poland, Hungary, and East Germany. Stalin wants them to stay loyal to the Soviet Union. He says, "We must protect ourselves from the West." Behind the Iron Curtain, life is strict. The government controls everything. Newspapers only print what Stalin allows. People must follow the rules or they face punishment. Spies are everywhere. Neighbors do not trust each other. A young girl named Anya hears her parents whispering at night. "Be careful what you say," her father tells her. The walls have ears. The Cold War is not a normal war. There are no battles with tanks or soldiers. Instead, it is a war of fear and secrets. Both the Soviet Union and the United States want to be the strongest. They build nuclear weapons, bombs that can destroy entire cities. The world holds its breath. People wonder, what if they use them? One of the most frightening moments comes in 1949. The Soviet Union tests its first nuclear bomb. The explosion shakes the ground and the world. Now, both sides have the power to destroy each other. The arms race begins. Each country builds more bombs, more missiles, more weapons. The fear grows. But the Cold War is not just about weapons. It is also about information. Both sides send spies to gather secrets. These spies live double lives. They wear disguises and use fake names. They pass messages in secret ways. Some hide notes in hollow rocks. Others use invisible ink. It feels like something from a movie, but it is real. A man named Ivan works as a spy for the Soviet Union. He pretends to be a businessman in the United States. One night, he meets another spy in a dark alley. They exchange papers. Ivan's heart races. He knows that if he is caught, he will go to prison. Or worse. At the same time, the Soviet Union works to spread communism. In Asia, China becomes communist in 1949. This worries the United States. They fear communism will spread to other countries too. They send money and weapons to stop it. The Soviet Union does the same for countries that support communism. Small wars break out in places like Korea and Vietnam. These wars are bloody and long. Back in the Soviet Union, life is hard. Factories are busy making weapons, but there is not enough food or consumer goods. A boy named Sergei waits in line for bread with his grandmother. The line is long, and the bread is small. "Why don't we have more?" Sergei asks. His grandmother sighs. "Because the government cares more about missiles than people." But not everyone is unhappy. Some believe in communism. They see the Soviet Union as a strong and powerful nation. Schools teach children that the West is the enemy. Films and posters show Stalin as a hero. Anya, the girl from earlier, writes an essay in school. "Stalin protects us," she writes. Her teacher smiles and says, "Good work." In the 1950s, Stalin dies. His death brings change. A new leader, Nikita Khrushchev, takes power. He is not like Stalin. He wants to improve life in the Soviet Union. He gives a famous speech in 1956. In it, he says Stalin made many mistakes. People are shocked. Some feel hopeful. Maybe things will get better, they say. Khrushchev also brings the Cold War to space. In 1957, the Soviet Union launches Sputnik, the first satellite. It circles the Earth. People around the world look up at the sky and wonder, what does this mean? The United States feels embarrassed. They start working harder to win the space race. Soon, it is a competition to see who can send the first man to space and later to the moon. As the Cold War continues, fear remains. In 1962, the world comes very close to disaster. The Soviet Union puts nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the United States. President John F. Kennedy demands they be removed. The Soviet Union refuses. For 13 days, the world waits. People are terrified. Children practice hiding under desks at school. Finally, Khrushchev agrees to remove the missiles. The crisis ends, but the fear does not. Behind the Iron Curtain, people begin to question their leaders. They see how life is different in the West. They hear about freedom and opportunities. Some try to escape. A man named Yuri decides to cross the Berlin Wall, which divides East and West Germany. He runs in the middle of the night. Guards shout. Bullets fly. Yuri reaches the other side. Tears run down his face. I am free, he whispers. For those who stay, life goes on. Anya grows up and becomes a teacher. She teaches her students about communism, but she also tells them to think for themselves. Ask questions, she says softly. Never stop learning. Her students nod, but they know not to speak too loudly. By the 1970s, the Cold War begins to change. Both sides realize that nuclear war would destroy everything. They start talking. They sign agreements to limit weapons. The fear lessens, but it never goes away completely. The Iron Curtain remains. The world is still divided. Chapter 7. Life in the USSR. The Soviet Union was a land of contrasts. To some, it was a land of hope and unity. To others, it was a place of fear and control. For ordinary people, life was a daily struggle. They lived under strict rules. The government decided almost everything. What they learned, where they worked, and even what they could say. Children grew up learning to love the Soviet Union. In schools, teachers spoke of the greatness of communism. They told stories of brave Soviet heroes and how the country defeated fascism in World War II. Every morning, children stood together and sang songs of loyalty. A girl named Katya sang loudly. She wanted to make her teacher proud. But sometimes, she wondered about the things her parents whispered at home. Is life really as great as they say in school? She thought. Parades filled the streets on special days. Red flags waved in the wind. Soldiers marched in perfect lines. Workers carried banners with slogans like, "Long live the Soviet Union," and "Glory to our leaders." People cheered and clapped. It looked like a celebration, but not everyone felt happy. Some clapped because they had to. If we don't go to the parade, a man named Victor said to his wife, they'll think we're against the government. Food was often limited. Shops had long lines, but their shelves were nearly empty. People waited for hours to buy bread, milk, or meat. A woman named Olga stood in line with her daughter. The child tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, I'm hungry," she said. Olga sighed and looked at the line ahead, "Soon, my dear," she replied. But she wasn't sure if there would be any food left by the time it was their turn. Even when people had enough to eat, life was not easy. Apartments were small and crowded. Families often shared kitchens and bathrooms with their neighbors. Privacy was rare. A man named Sergei remembered hearing his neighbors argue through the thin walls. "We can't even speak freely in our own home," he told his wife. She placed a finger to her lips and whispered, "Shh, someone might hear you." Fear of the government was everywhere. The secret police, known as the KGB, listened for any sign of disloyalty. People who criticized the government could lose their jobs, or worse. Some were sent to prisons or labor camps. Others simply disappeared. At work, a factory worker named Ivan told his friend a joke about the government. His friend laughed, but later reported him. Ivan was arrested that night. His family never saw him again. Despite the fear, some people dared to dream of freedom. They listened to forbidden radio stations like Voice of America or BBC. These stations broadcast news from outside the Soviet Union. A teenager named Yuri turned the dial on his small radio late at night. He heard voices speaking about life in the West, freedom, music, and choices. His heart raced. He felt excited, but also scared. If the government found out, his family could be punished. Art and culture were also controlled. Writers, musicians, and artists had to create work that praised the Soviet Union. A poet named Anna wrote secretly in her journal. She wanted to express her true feelings, but she knew her words were dangerous. One night, she burned her poems. Tears ran down her face as she watched the flames. "I can't risk it," she whispered. Still, there were moments of joy. People found ways to celebrate life. They gathered for birthdays and weddings. They shared stories and laughed. Children played in the streets, running and shouting. Families went to parks on sunny days. They enjoyed ice cream and watched the river flow. These simple moments brought happiness, even in hard times. The Soviet Union also offered some opportunities. Education was free for everyone. Many people became doctors, engineers, and teachers. A young boy named Mikhail dreamed of becoming an astronaut. He studied hard and listened to stories about Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space. If he can do it, so can I, Mikhail thought. Healthcare was also free, but hospitals were often crowded. Medicines were limited. A nurse named Marina worked long hours in a small clinic. She wanted to help people, but sometimes she felt hopeless. How can I save lives, she thought, when we don't even have enough bandages? Some people believed in the Soviet dream. They thought communism would bring equality and a better life. A farmer named Pavel worked hard on a collective farm. He plowed fields and planted crops for the community. "This is how we will feed everyone," he told his son. But when the harvest came, most of the food went to the government. Pavel's family barely had enough to eat. By the 1980s, cracks in the system began to show. People were tired of waiting in lines. They were frustrated by the shortages and the lack of freedom. Even loyal citizens started to question the government. Katya, now an adult, spoke quietly with her husband. "We were taught to love the Soviet Union," she said. "But was it all a lie?" Life in the USSR was full of contradictions. It was a place of parades and poverty, unity and fear. People worked hard and dreamed of a better future. Some believed in the system, others wanted change, but one thing was certain: life behind the Iron Curtain was not easy. Chapter 8. Leaders and Change. The year is 1953. Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, is dead. For decades he ruled with an iron fist. Millions feared him. Now people whisper, "What will happen next?" Stalin's death brings a moment of hope. Some dream of freedom. Others fear chaos. In Moscow, thousands gather to see his funeral. His body lies in a grand hall. Flowers surround him. People cry, but not everyone cries for the same reason. Some mourn a leader they respected. Others weep with relief. "At least the worst is over," one man whispers to his wife. A struggle for power begins. Many leaders want to take Stalin's place. Among them is Nikita Khrushchev. He is different from Stalin. He smiles, he laughs, he seems approachable, but he is also clever. He works quietly to gain support. After months of political battles, Khrushchev becomes the new leader. At first, people do not know what to expect. Will Khrushchev be like Stalin, or will he bring change? The answer comes in 1956. At a secret meeting of Soviet leaders, Khrushchev gives a shocking speech. He speaks about Stalin's crimes. He tells the truth about the Great Purge and the millions who suffered under Stalin's rule. The news spreads. Some are angry. They say Khrushchev is wrong to speak against Stalin. But others feel hope. A woman named Olga listens to the speech on the radio. Tears run down her face. "Maybe things will finally get better," she whispers. Khrushchev promises reform. He wants to improve life for ordinary people. He orders the release of many political prisoners. He closes some labor camps. He says the Soviet Union must focus on building homes, schools, and factories, not fear. But change is slow. Life is still hard. Food is often scarce. Lines for bread and meat remain long. Housing is crowded. In a small apartment in Moscow, a family of 5 shares 2 tiny rooms. The mother, Maria, tries to stay positive. "At least we have a roof over our heads," she says to her children. But inside, she dreams of a better life. Meanwhile, the Cold War grows colder. The Soviet Union and the United States continue to compete. They build more weapons, more missiles, more bombs. Both sides fear the other. Khrushchev pushes the Soviet Union to stay strong. He challenges the United States to a space race. "We must show the world our power," he says. In 1957, the Soviet Union launches Sputnik, the first satellite. It circles the Earth. People across the world are amazed. In the United States, leaders feel embarrassed. The space race has begun. Khrushchev is proud. He sees Sputnik as proof of the Soviet Union's strength. But not everyone shares Khrushchev's confidence. Behind the scenes, problems grow. The Soviet economy struggles. Factories produce weapons, but not enough everyday goods. Farmers struggle to grow enough food. Khrushchev tries to fix these problems. He introduces new farming methods. He starts a program called the Virgin Lands Campaign. It encourages people to farm unused land in Kazakhstan and Siberia. At first, the program seems successful, but soon, problems arise. The soil is poor, the weather is harsh, crops fail, people grow frustrated. Why does the government always experiment with our lives? One farmer asks angrily. In Eastern Europe, the cracks in Soviet control begin to show. Many countries, like Hungary and Poland, are part of the Soviet bloc. They are supposed to follow Soviet rules. But in 1956, the people of Hungary rise up. They want freedom. They want to make their own decisions. The Soviet Union sends tanks to Budapest, the capital of Hungary. The streets are filled with smoke and fire. Thousands die. The uprising is crushed. A young man named Peter watches from a hiding place. He sees the bodies of his neighbors in the streets. Why can't we live free? He wonders. These events shake Khrushchev's leadership. People begin to question his decisions. Some say he is too soft. Others say he is not strong enough to lead. Even in his own government, enemies plot against him. In 1962, the world comes close to disaster. The Soviet Union places nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the United States. American leaders demand that the missiles be removed. For 13 days, the world waits in fear. People wonder if nuclear war will begin. Finally, Khrushchev agrees to remove the missiles. The crisis ends, but it weakens his position. Some see him as a hero for avoiding war. Others see him as weak for backing down. In 1964, Khrushchev is forced to step down. He is replaced by Leonid Brezhnev. Under Brezhnev, the Soviet Union becomes more stable, but also more rigid. Brezhnev avoids dramatic changes. He focuses on keeping order. He builds up the military and keeps tight control over Eastern Europe. Parades continue. Speeches praise the greatness of the Soviet Union. But for many people, life remains the same, difficult and restricted. Still, some remember Khrushchev's time as a period of hope. Olga, the woman who once cried listening to Khrushchev's speech, reflects on his leadership. He tried, she says. Maybe he failed in some ways, but he gave us a glimpse of something better. By the 1970s, the Soviet Union seems strong, but the cracks are still there. The economy is weak. The people are tired. The Cold War continues. Leaders come and go. Promises of change are made, but real progress is slow. For now, the Soviet Union holds together. But how long can it last? Chapter 9. A Race to the Stars. In 1957, the world looks to the skies. The Cold War is not only a battle of weapons and ideas. Now it is a race for space. The Soviet Union wants to prove its strength. So does the United States. Both countries compete to be first in this new frontier. On October 4th, 1957, The Soviet Union surprises the world. A small satellite called Sputnik is launched into space. It is the first man-made object to orbit the Earth. The sound of its radio signal, beep, 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 is heard around the globe. People stare at the night sky, wondering, is it really up there? In the United States, leaders are shocked. They thought they were ahead in technology. Now they feel humiliated. How did the Soviets do this? American newspapers ask. Schools begin teaching more math and science. The space race has begun. In the Soviet Union, the people feel proud. Children learn about Sputnik in school. A boy named Mikhail dreams of becoming a scientist. We can do anything, his teacher says. We are leading the world. Pride fills the streets. But behind the scenes, the government knows this is just the beginning. They must go further. The Soviet Union starts working on its next goal, sending a human into space. Scientists and engineers work day and night. They build rockets, test equipment, and train pilots. One of these pilots is Yuri Gagarin. He is young, brave, and full of energy. His smile is bright. People call him the perfect Soviet hero. Yuri trains hard. He spends hours in a spinning machine that makes him dizzy. He practices sitting in a tiny capsule. He knows the risks. Rockets are dangerous. Some tests fail, but Yuri is determined. I want to make history, he says. Finally, the day arrives. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin climbs into the spacecraft Vostok 1. He is calm, but excited. The rocket is tall, powerful, and ready to launch. His heart beats fast as the countdown begins. 3, 2, 1. The rocket roars to life. Flames light up the sky. Yuri feels the force push him back into his seat. I'm going, he shouts. Soon, he is in space. He looks out the window and sees the Earth below. It is blue, white, and beautiful. What a sight, he whispers. For 108 minutes, Yuri orbits the Earth. He is the first human in space. The world watches in awe. When he lands safely, he becomes a hero. Crowds cheer his name. Children draw pictures of rockets. Yuri smiles and waves. This is a victory for all of us, he says. We have shown the power of the Soviet Union. The United States feels the pressure. They send astronauts into space. They build new rockets. President John F. Kennedy makes a bold promise. We will send a man to the moon before the end of this decade. The space race becomes more intense. Back in the Soviet Union, the government pushes for more achievements. They send a woman, Valentina Tereshkova, into space. They send probes to the moon and Venus. Each success brings pride, but each mission also costs money, time, and resources. Factories must work harder. Scientists face more pressure. Mistakes are not allowed. In a small town, a girl named Anya listens to the news about space. She dreams of being an astronaut one day, but her family struggles to buy food. How can we afford to send people to space, her father asks, when we don't have enough bread? Anya does not answer. She looks at the stars and wonders, is it worth it? The space race inspires people, but it also causes problems. Rockets are expensive to build. The government spends money on space, but the people still need homes, schools, and food. Workers grow tired. Farmers struggle. Not everyone feels the same pride they once did. One engineer, Ivan, works on building rockets. He is proud of his job, but he rarely sees his family. His wife grows frustrated. "You care more about rockets than us," she says. Ivan feels torn. He loves his work, but he misses his children. "I'm doing this for the country," he replies softly. By the late 1960s, the Soviet Union achieves many firsts in space, but the United States begins to catch up. In 1969, American astronauts land on the moon. The Soviet Union watches in silence. The moon landing is a great victory for the United States. For the first time, the Soviet Union feels like it is falling behind. Still, the Soviet Union continues its work. They build space stations and send more missions into orbit. They focus on long-term space exploration. But the excitement of the early years fades. The space race is no longer about glory. It is about survival. Can they keep up with the United States? Can they afford to? In schools, children still learn about Yuri Gagarin. His story inspires them. A boy named Sergei looks at a picture of Yuri on the wall. He says, "If Yuri could do it, maybe I can too." But his teacher knows times have changed. The dreams are still big, but the resources are limited. Yuri Gagarin remains a hero. His face is on stamps, posters, and statues. People remember his courage and his smile. But even Yuri cannot escape tragedy. In 1968, he dies in a plane crash during a training flight. The nation mourns. "He was our star," one woman says. "Now he is gone." By the 1970s, the space race slows down. Both the Soviet Union and the United States realize they cannot keep spending so much money on space. They begin to work together. In 1975, American and Soviet spacecraft dock in space. Astronauts from both countries shake hands. It is a moment of peace in a long, tense rivalry. The space race was a time of wonder and competition. It pushed the Soviet Union to achieve great things, but it also showed the limits of what one nation could do. Rockets flew to the stars, but back on Earth, the people still faced many challenges. The question remains, how long can a nation chase the stars without forgetting the people below? Chapter 10. Cracks in the Wall. The year is 1985. The Soviet Union is no longer the strong, proud nation it once seemed. Factories are breaking down, machines are old, workers are tired. The economy struggles to keep up with the rest of the world. People wait in long lines for bread and milk. They wonder, why is life still so hard? In small apartments across the country, families gather around their radios. They listen to the news. A new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, has come to power. He is young and energetic. He talks about change. He uses words the people have not heard before: glasnost, openness, and perestroika, rebuilding. Some feel hope. Others feel fear. What will these words mean for their lives? Gorbachev knows the Soviet Union is in trouble. He has seen the failing factories, the empty shelves, the frustrated people. He believes the system must change. "We cannot go on like this," he says. "We need to rebuild." He begins with glasnost. This means more openness in government and society. For years, the Soviet Union hid its problems. Now Gorbachev wants people to speak the truth. Newspapers write about issues they once ignored. People talk more openly about their struggles. A teacher named Elena reads an article about government corruption. She shakes her head. How could this go on for so long? She wonders. At first, glasnost feels like a breath of fresh air. People are excited. They discuss ideas freely, but it also brings fear. Speaking out is still risky. An old man named Sergei whispers to his friend, "Do you think this will last? Or will they punish us for what we say?" Gorbachev also introduces perestroika. He wants to rebuild the economy. He allows small private businesses. He encourages new ideas and methods. Farmers can sell more of their crops for profit. Factory managers have more freedom to make decisions. It seems like progress, but it is not enough. The economy remains weak. In a factory in Moscow, workers sit quietly during their lunch break. One man sighs and says, "We work harder than ever, but nothing changes. Where is this rebuilding they talk about?" His co-workers nod. They are tired. They want results, not promises. As changes spread, people begin to challenge the old ways. In Eastern Europe, countries under Soviet control start to push back. In Poland, workers go on strike. They demand better pay and more freedom. In Hungary and Czechoslovakia, leaders talk about reform. The Soviet Union always crushed these movements before. But now, Gorbachev tells them, "You must solve your own problems." The people feel empowered. One of the biggest symbols of Soviet control is the Berlin Wall. It divides East and West Germany. For years, people in East Germany lived under strict Soviet rules. The wall keeps them from escaping to the freer, more prosperous West. Families are separated. A young man named Thomas stands at the wall and stares. He dreams of crossing to the other side, but he knows the guards will shoot if he tries. By the late 1980s, cracks begin to appear, both in the wall and in the Soviet Union itself. The government struggles to control the growing demands for freedom. In Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, people march in the streets. They wave their flags and chant, "We want independence." Gorbachev faces a difficult choice. Should he send in the army to stop them? Or should he let them go? Meanwhile, ordinary people feel the changes in their daily lives. In a small village, a woman named Olga runs a tiny bakery. Under the old rules, she had no control over her business. Now, with perestroika, she can sell her bread and cakes for profit. She works hard and feels proud, but she also worries. What if they change the rules again? She asks her husband. What if it's all taken away? The world watches closely. Leaders in the United States and Europe wonder what will happen to the Soviet Union. Some believe Gorbachev is brave. Others think he is taking too many risks. In 1987, Gorbachev meets with U.S. President Ronald Reagan. Together, they sign a treaty to reduce nuclear weapons. It is a moment of hope. But back home, Gorbachev faces criticism. Some say he is too weak. Others say he is moving too fast. In 1989, the changes reach a breaking point. Across Eastern Europe, people rise up. They demand freedom. They tear down statues of Soviet leaders. In November, the Berlin Wall falls. People from East and West Germany celebrate together. Thomas, the young man who once stared at the wall, runs through the open gate. Tears stream down his face. "We are free!" he shouts. The fall of the Berlin Wall shocks the world. It shows that Soviet control is crumbling. In the Soviet Union itself, more cracks appear. Factories close. Workers lose their jobs. Inflation rises. People grow angry. Gorbachev struggles to hold the country together. In 1991, a group of hardliners tries to take power. They believe Gorbachev has weakened the Soviet Union. Tanks roll into Moscow. For 3 days, the world holds its breath. Will there be another Soviet crackdown? But then, something surprising happens. Ordinary people stand in the streets. They block the tanks. They chant, "Freedom, democracy." One of these protesters is a young woman named Anna. She holds a homemade sign that says, "No more fear." Her hands tremble, but she refuses to back down. "This is our moment," she tells herself. "We cannot let it slip away." The coup fails. Gorbachev returns to power, but his authority is weakened. By the end of 1991, the Soviet Union collapses. 15 new countries are born. The red flag with the hammer and sickle is lowered for the last time. A new era begins. Chapter 11. The People Speak. The year is 1989. Across Eastern Europe, the air is thick with change. For decades, the Soviet Union has controlled these countries. Its leaders made the rules. Its soldiers kept the peace. But now, the people are tired. They are ready to rise up. It begins in Poland. Workers go on strike. They demand better pay and more rights. The government tries to stop them, but the workers do not give up. Soon, a movement called Solidarity grows. It spreads through factories and towns. People chant, "Freedom, freedom." The government agrees to talk. Elections are held. A new leader is chosen. For the first time, Poland begins to break free. The news spreads quickly. In Hungary, the people watch with hope. They gather in the streets. They demand change. The government listens. It opens the border to Austria. People cross freely. For years, the Soviet Union told them where they could go. Now, the walls are coming down. In East Germany, the mood is tense. The Berlin Wall divides the city. On one side is the free West. On the other is the controlled East. For years, people have tried to escape the East. Some were caught. Some were killed. But now, the people demand more. Crowds gather near the wall. They shout, "Open the gates!" The guards are confused. They do not know what to do. On November 9th, 1989, something incredible happens. The guards open the gates. People pour through. They climb on the wall. They hug each other. They cry. For the first time in decades, East and West Berlin are one. Thomas, a young man from East Berlin, is in the crowd. He crosses the border with tears in his eyes. "I thought this day would never come," he says. He touches the wall and feels its cold, hard surface. Then he watches as people begin to break it down. Piece by piece, the wall falls. The fall of the Berlin Wall shocks the world. It is more than the end of a barrier. It is the end of Soviet control in Eastern Europe. Country by country, the people rise up. In Czechoslovakia, they fill the streets with songs and candles. In Bulgaria, they march peacefully. In Romania, the protests turn violent. But in every country, the message is clear. The people want freedom. Back in the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev watches closely. He knows the Soviet system is losing its grip, but he does not send soldiers to stop the protests. "We must let them choose their own path," he says. Some praise him for his decision. Others call him weak. The protests spread to the Soviet Union itself. In Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, people march in long human chains. They hold hands and sing. They wave their flags. They say, "We want independence." These countries have been part of the Soviet Union for years, but now they want to be free. In Moscow, the mood is tense. People gather in Red Square. They shout slogans and hold signs. A young woman named Anna stands in the crowd. She holds a homemade banner that says, "We deserve a voice." Her hands tremble, but her voice is strong. "This is our chance," she tells her friend. "We must speak now, or it will be too late." The government tries to stay in control. Some hardliners want to stop the protests. They believe Gorbachev is to blame for the chaos. In August 1991, they attempt a coup. Tanks roll into the streets of Moscow. Soldiers surround government buildings. The world watches. Will the Soviet Union return to its old ways? But something surprising happens. The people do not back down. Crowds block the tanks. They chant, "Freedom! Democracy!" A man named Boris Yeltsin climbs on top of a tank. He speaks to the crowd. His voice is loud and firm. "We will not go back!" he shouts. The people cheer. The coup fails. The hardliners are arrested. After the coup, the Soviet Union begins to fall apart. One by one, the republics declare independence. Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, and others break away. Gorbachev tries to hold the country together, but it is too late. The people want change. The leaders of the republics demand freedom. On December 25, 1991, Gorbachev resigns as the leader of the Soviet Union. The red flag with a hammer and sickle is lowered for the last time. The Soviet Union is gone. 15 new countries take its place. For some, it is a moment of joy. They celebrate their independence. They believe a new future is possible. Thomas, the young man from East Berlin, now lives in a united Germany. He smiles as he watches the news. "We are free," he says, "at last." But for others, it is a time of uncertainty. In Moscow, Anna worries about what will happen next. The shops are empty. Prices rise. Her father loses his job. Is this what freedom looks like? She wonders. Will things ever get better? The fall of the Soviet Union is the end of an era. It is a time of hope, fear, and change. The people spoke, and the walls came down. But the journey is not over. The world watches as the former Soviet republics begin to find their way. Chapter 12. The Last Goodbye. The year is 1991. It is winter in Moscow. Snow falls gently on Red Square. The streets are quiet, but there is tension in the air. Something big is happening. The Soviet Union, the great superpower, is coming to an end. For 70 years, the Soviet Union shaped the world. It was a land of massive factories and vast fields, a land of space pioneers and military strength. It survived wars, revolutions, and crises, but now it is breaking apart. People feel many emotions. Some are hopeful. Others are afraid. On December 25th, 1991, a historic event takes place. Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union, resigns. He gives a speech on television. His voice is calm but sad. The Soviet Union no longer exists, he says. We must move forward. In the Kremlin, the red flag with a hammer and sickle is lowered. For the first time in decades, it will not fly over Moscow. In its place, the flag of Russia rises. A new era begins. 15 new countries are born from the collapse of the Soviet Union. Russia is the largest. Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, and others also become independent. Each country must now find its own way. It is an exciting time, but also a dangerous one. In Moscow, Anna watches Gorbachev's speech with her family. Her father shakes his head. I never thought I'd see this day, he says. Anna feels unsure. She remembers the parades, the songs, and the pride of her childhood. Now, everything seems uncertain. What will happen to us? She wonders. For some, the collapse brings joy. In Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, people celebrate their independence. They wave their flags and sing their national songs. In Ukraine, farmers gather in their fields. They say, now we can decide our own future. In the streets of Kiev, a young man named Petro feels a mix of emotions. He is proud of his country's freedom, but he is also nervous. Will we be able to survive on our own? He asks his friend. His friend smiles and says, we will find a way. Not everyone feels hopeful. In small Russian towns, factories close, workers lose their jobs, pensioners struggle to buy food, prices rise every day. A woman named Olga stands in a market, counting her money. It's not enough, she says softly. She puts back a loaf of bread. Her son looks up at her. Mama, when will it get better? He asks. Olga has no answer. The collapse also changes politics. New leaders take power in the 15 countries. Some promise democracy. Others hold tightly to old ways. In Russia, Boris Yeltsin becomes president. He is strong and confident, but he faces a tough road ahead. The economy is weak. People are angry. They want quick solutions. In the countryside, life is even harder. Farmers like Ivan struggle to adapt. Under the Soviet system, the government controlled everything. Now, Ivan must make his own decisions. He looks at his empty barn and sighs. How can I compete with the world? He wonders. But there are signs of hope. Young people dream of new opportunities. A student named Katya studies English at her university. She listens to Western music and watches American movies. The world is bigger than I thought, she says. Maybe we can be part of it. The collapse of the Soviet Union also changes the world. For decades, the Soviet Union and the United States were rivals. Now, the Cold War is over. Leaders from the West welcome the changes, but they also watch carefully. They know the transition will not be easy. In the former Soviet republics, people try to rebuild their lives. Some embrace freedom. They start businesses, learn new skills, and travel abroad. Others miss the stability of the past. They remember when everyone had a job, a home, and food to eat. We had less, one man says, but we were safe. In Moscow, the streets feel different. The old statues of Lenin still stand, but they seem out of place. New shops open. Western brands appear for the first time. People walk past a McDonald's, curious but cautious. Anna sees the bright yellow sign and thinks, is this the future? The collapse of the Soviet Union is not just the end of a country. It is the end of an idea. Communism once promised equality for all. But now, people see its failures, the shortages, the fear, the corruption. Many wonder, could it have been different? For the new countries, the journey ahead is uncertain. Some, like Estonia and Latvia, turn to the West. They join the European Union and NATO. Others, like Russia, look inward. They struggle to find their place in the world. As the year 1991 ends, history turns a new page. The Soviet Union is gone, but its legacy remains. The people who lived through it carry its memories, both good and bad. Some remember the victories, space exploration, education, and pride. Others recall the struggles, hunger, fear, and control. In a small Russian village, an old man named Yuri sits by his fire. He stares into the flames and thinks about his life. He remembers Stalin's rule, the Great Patriotic War, the parades, and the promises of a better future. Now, everything has changed. It's hard to say goodbye, he whispers. The future is unknown. But one thing is certain. The people of the former Soviet Union will continue to write their own stories. They will rebuild, learn, and grow. They will face challenges, but they will also find new opportunities. The last goodbye is not the end. It is the beginning.